Today's guest was in sales enablement before it even had a name, back when training meant booking a room, handing out a PowerPoint, and hoping for the best. Pam Dake's now Senior Director of Go-To-Market Enablement at Menlo Security, and she's made a career out of transforming enablement from an afterthought into a boardroom level advantage. She calls BS on the idea that product training is enough, and she's got receipts to prove that when enablement is done right, when it's consistent, strategic, and customer obsessed, it can reduce deal friction, tighten sales cycles, and actually make forecast calls worth sitting in on. We're diving into how to take enablement from flavor of the month to the force that fuels your entire go-to-market engine. If this convo hits home, hit us back, drop a comment on LinkedIn, and subscribe to the Coach2Scale YouTube channel so you don't miss a beat. Let's go.
Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Bonelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. My guest today has been leading the charge in sales enablement since before it had a proper name. Pam Dake started in financial services, like me, before making the leap into high tech, where she spent most of her career helping go-to-market teams, go to market. She joked she was part of sales enablement before it was really enablement, but don't let that humility fool you. Pam's seen firsthand how sales enablement has evolved from order taker to a strategic business partner and a competitive advantage in thriving organizations. In today's episode, we're going to dig into that transformation and why real enablement starts from the outside in with the customer and earns its seat all the way up to the C-suite. Pam Dake, Senior Director of Go-To-Market Enablement at Menlo Security. Welcome to Coach2Scale.
Thanks so much, Matt. Super happy to be here, but that's quite an intro to live up to. So hopefully we will walk our way through there and I will be able to give you the payoff that you're looking for. But thank you for the invite. Much appreciated.
The conversations that we've had have been phenomenal. I walk away better for having them. So really looking forward to having this one and sharing it with the world. So Pam, let's start off with a myth buster question. And I'm going to gear it toward what you do. So Pam, what's a myth in sales enablement that you hear all the time, you've heard it for years, that you believe is misguided or maybe even complete BS?
Oh, that's a good one, Matt. So I would say to start off, and there's been an evolution with it, but the myth buster several years ago was always like, we don't need enablement. We have our product teams doing that. We have our product marketing teams doing that. We have marketing doing it. I think it's evolved a bit more because enablement's gotten a little bit more established, but I think there's still a big myth around enablement of being much more of an art than a science. And I'd love to argue that there is actually much more science behind it because there's a lot of quantitative and qualitative data now behind what enablement is able to do in helping be a part of that revenue engine. And so the fact that I think we have moved past that myth buster of we don't need enablement to really saying, yeah, but it's still much more, an art and less of a science. And it's a lot harder to ever, quantify the effect that enablement is having. And I think we finally had that turn where we're able to move past that myth buster, but it's still stuff that we hear from time and time again.
Yeah, I resonates with me. I've heard it for years. When you ask people about their go-to-market enablement or their sales enablement, invariably what it boils down to is product training. And
yes.
And there's different ways to do that. I'm being, painting with a broad brush, but I think that happens, and product training is not go-to-market enablement, as I know you and I are violently aligned. Pam, what did sales enablement mean maybe when you first got into the business, and what does it mean today?
Oof. It was definitely seen an evolution, thank goodness. I would say it was very much focused initially on what you were saying, very much on product training, or onboarding, and the word training was really what sales enablement was and what everyone thought sales enablement was all about. But as it's evolved and as it's really grown legs and been able to have the opportunity to really be a part of the revenue engine, it's broadened in its scope, rightfully so, because even as sales training, it's never just training within a bucket, especially when you're talking about training those folks who are having effective prospect and customer conversations. There's always much more to it. The training isn't just a land the training and there you go, we're finished. We all know that that's not something that works. We are behavior creatures. We need to mold and shape what we are doing. And so training is always just like that point in time. Whereas what you do programmatically around that training is much more important, because that's how you'll effectively have behavior change and move the direction that you really need to go as a business. So when we think about training and just training in and of itself, it's just a point in time. Whereas if you really are thinking holistically about what you're trying to drive from a change perspective, wow, you really have to think about how the training you entice to want to go to the training, you make that training impactful and engaging and able to be addressed by different learning styles. And then you need to carry that forward with how you're supporting the training that you're doing. So while it started out as like, okay, enablement is training and that's all we do, I think even back then, it wasn't just all you do. You had to think much more programmatically about it and how you were effectively aligning everything from the communications that you're doing to get people to want to go to training and to attend training, to how you're also wrapping and packaging that and supporting that with everything that you're doing to drive forward those behaviors with your managers, your sales managers, your executives, so that there's that lens of some level of inspection that are we really hitting the mark with what we're doing in trying to drive different behaviors through training.
Was there
Long-winded answer, but I think it's kind of, it's moved that direction pretty hard, and it started even in its infancy with having that as a part of the package.
And it's fantastic to see the transformation, because it helps at all levels, right? It doesn't just help the organization, but it helps the different people in it, the cross-functional groups in it. I remember at Oracle, I was aligned with a sales enablement partner back when it was more order taking, coordinating, ordering pizzas. And I was aligned with this wonderful woman who was like full of energy and ideas. And she didn't report to me. I was based out of Boston and she was based out of Toronto back at the time when we weren't really adept at managing, and working remotely, but we figured it out. But, I just had a conversation with her one day and I said, are you doing everything you can? And, that was the gist of the conversation. And the gist of it's like, no. And I'm like, well, what do you think you can do? Like, what do we do in here? The only rule is there are no rules. Like, nobody dies, nobody gets fired. But like, what can we do? Like, how are you going to be excited to come in to do your job? Because I can't imagine, you don't seem like, I wouldn't be excited if I was doing your job. Like, that's probably the way I said it, which isn't the right way. But and she wasn't. Like, I knew, like, she was really good. And we ended up doing some fantastic things together because of her and the ideas that she brought. And my team, everybody started to look at her and what she did in a different light. And again, it's more toward what we're going to talk about, which is that strategic business partner competitive advantage. At the time, I got to tell you, I was narrowly focused. I was trying to be a better group, lead a better team than my counterparts. Like, I wanted internally to have the best team. We weren't really thinking as much as we should have about the customers at the time. But hey, if we're doing a good job, it's going to extend out to the customer. And I think, as you're going to talk about in a little bit, it's going to come back at us like a boomerang.
Yep.
But Pam, was there a turning point where enablement started to move from this order taking kind of rote, my words, supportive organization to growing into what it is now?
Ooh, I think it's been an evolution versus a revolution in how it's, kind of taken shape over time. And I would say it has to do with a couple of things. I love the example that you were giving with the woman that you worked with at Oracle, because I think it provides a really unique opportunity to talk about enablement a little bit differently. And where I'm going with this is what she probably offered, and I'd love to challenge you a little bit on this, is she provided you with a unique lens of the business that no one else has. Enablement, part of the effectivity that you're able to drive with enablement is the fact that you really are the glue, if you will, or the conduit for all of the different internal teams and stakeholders who are serving your customer-facing teams. And you're in a unique role because you don't necessarily own product. You don't necessarily own putting together collateral in product marketing. You don't own the marketing engine of what you're doing. And quite frankly, you don't own the sales role or sales operations from that lens. But you have insight into all of those different functions in a very unique way. And so what I imagine she was able to do for you as you kind of inspected and allowed her to open up and potentially share and do more was that she was able to provide that unique lens of the business, give that information to you and to leadership, and to be able to drive forward things in a very unique way because of the insight and because of the alignment of the internal teams that enablement is able to provide. That's the kind of the key part of enablement, that if you really get that at a deep level as a leader, that's where and why and how I think enablement can be most impactful and most effective, because you see them as being this unique, almost chief of staff role, less in the numbers, although the numbers are critically important, but in how you're aligning the internal resources to drive things forward in the organization. So kind of a little bit of a tangent to where you were going with your question, but I think that provides sort of a lens into the evolution of sales enablement versus the revolution of it. And so for me, it's a lot of education of the people that you work with to really understand that unique role and that unique lens that enablement has. And so I have seen it on the whole, I think it's gained traction, but when you're actually in the midst of it and you're in that company, it's an ongoing education process for folks who either haven't had good enablement, haven't had enablement before, or have had overly, other stakeholders who were trying to jump in and trying to do too much of the enablement role when they had skin in the game, if that makes sense. Yeah. So enablement doesn't have that same skin in the game because they aren't in those specific roles. They're the conduit to connect them all.
Yeah, and it's been an evolution. I mean, I'll accept your challenge. So yeah, so her name was Michelle, and Michelle got me to look at the business through a different lens. And when I think about the lens I was looking at, the lenses I was looking at the business at that time, and we're talking about the 34-year-old Matt, not the 54-year-old Matt. So it was 20 plus years ago. If I knew then what I knew now, type of thing. But I was, my main business partner at the time was in sales consulting or solution engineering, my SE team. And I had a phenomenal SE team and with an unbelievable SE leader. But when we looked at it through that lens, we were looking at it through the product. And so we did a lot of product.
Very different lens.
And I was never a product guy. I barely knew what a database was. And even though I was at Oracle for 62 and a half quarters, by the end, I knew a little bit. But when I first started, I knew nothing. I relied heavily on the SE team. So when I was comfortable with sales, but then when I relied on my partner, we're looking at it through product, through the technical aspects, right? And then Michelle came in from the sales enablement side, and one of the things she brought to the table got me to see the opportunity to upskill the managers. These weren't her words. If she happens to listen to this, or someone figures out who I'm talking about, she didn't say this, but basically what was derived was managers don't really know they don't know how to be managers because they've never been trained. They were great salespeople. You've seen this a lot, right? Great salespeople. Congratulations. Yep. Now you're the sales manager. Thoughts and prayers. Good luck. And
yep. And Mythbuster with some of those folks who are at the executive level, bringing on board experienced sales managers, thinking they still don't need any training and they don't need ongoing training. And so, back to Mythbusters again. Oh yeah, they know what to do. They manage people. Yeah. Well, they're also managing the business. They're also trying to coach. They're also trying to do all these things. And if we don't put our mark and our stamp on it, how do we know if they're being, number one, effective? Because we haven't given them the framework and the outline for it. And each and every time and each and every business is a little bit different. So why wouldn't you want to take a look at that audience and ensure that you're driving a framed approach and disciplined approach to how you're helping them be better managers and coaches, quite frankly.
Yeah. And what she did, she basically said, okay, managers need some help. Okay, what are they doing well? And we said, hey, you know what? They're like, they're reading books and they're learning and they're trying to apply it with their team. The challenge is there's, 50 managers in the group, they're reading 50 different books, applying 50 different things. And, we're trying to make some sense out of it. So one of the ideas was, well, why don't we have like a book club for managers? And someone said, well, why don't we get the author to come talk about it? And okay, like, how do we get the author? I mean, this is a long time ago. So anyway, the other thing Michelle did that was great. She picked up the phone or emailed and got these people to say yes to come on. And I don't know, it was once a month, maybe. We'd have an author, and we had some big authors. Daniel Pink, was one of them, wrote the book Drive, but they would come on, and talk about their book. And then we would rally that for the month or the quarter or whatever it was. And then, and so we had more people doing the right things at the right time more often. Right. And so anyway, shout out to Michelle for that. But, that's where I saw that enablement wasn't being utilized as much as it could. And it started to explore ways to get them brought into the fold. So I appreciate the walk down memory lane with you. Pam, if you were building a sales enablement function from scratch today, what would you prioritize first and what would you leave behind?
I do this over and over and over again. So I tend to love working with startup to just getting past that startup phase. So I do this on a regular basis. So very appropriate question to ask me. A lot of times enablement is brought on board, sure, for training and for product training, but the other area is onboarding. And it's typically, so a company is starting to think about the engine is getting going. We're going to be bringing on board all of these customer facing people. Typically it's looking for net new business. So those net new business seekers, those hunters versus the farmers. How do we get them ramped and up to speed quickly? So onboarding is typically a priority. Product training is typically a priority. And if you're lucky, you're getting down the pathway of ensuring that your frontline sales managers are doing some of the right behaviors. But I'd say that's a distant third, but one that you would absolutely want to put focus on and energy and resources towards if you can. But as I've gotten going, it's really being much more programmatic and prescriptive with what you're doing in enablement. And as you're a team of one, a team of 2, 3, 4, 5, being absolutely disciplined and crisp about only moving forward programmatically with what you can be predictable, consistent, and repeatable with your motions of what you're doing. Random programs that start and stop at odd times, that is spray and pray enablement. And that is definitely not something that I would want anyone to subscribe to, because then you lose the consistency and the comfort level of, oh, I know enablement can help me sort through the noise, because they have consistent programs that they're doing. They have consistent motions that they're doing. Think of enablement as the swan on top of the water, absolutely keeping everything is under control. We have this, well on our way. You're paddling like crazy underneath. And just because you're predictable, consistent, and repeatable doesn't mean you can't change on a dime. You have the programs, you have the framework, and you have the discipline for what you're doing, that you're able to be even more nimble, if that makes sense. Because you have that framed approach, and because people know when you're going to communicate, they know when you're having live virtual sessions that are connecting the dots, internal teams per se. They know when you're going to be having product training. So if you need to change out that product training because that you have once a month or bi-weekly, depending on how often you change your products, you can pivot that on a dime. People already know that they're going to come, and that's going to be important information, and that's the information they need to pay attention to now. But so you can change things up, but you want to frame out the discipline for what you're doing programmatically so that people know that enablement is the source of truth and can help me really sort through the noise, be a gatekeeper, but also be a conduit for an aligning the teams internally source. Hoping that answers your question and heading down the right direction of how to build out enablement and how to be thoughtful and prescriptive about it as you look to grow and scale.
All right. So let me just make sure I understand the answer, both sides of the question. The question was, how would you prioritize if you're building enablement functions? What would you prioritize, and what would you maybe leave behind? And what I heard you say was you'd prioritize things like onboarding, training, where the product fits in, and ideally helping the managers make sure that they're doing the coaching that they need to do. And what you'd leave behind is the random flavor of the month, right?
Absolutely.
In favor of consistency over time. Would that be fair?
Yes, that would absolutely be fair.
Okay. We've talked in the past about enablement as a secret weapon, right? As trying to build that competitive advantage. Is enablement really the secret weapon that more companies should be investing in but aren't?
I absolutely think that enablement should be an area that companies would be wise to invest in, and to make sure that you do have a leader in enablement that can build the foundations for enablement, which we kind of touched on in one of our last questions, Matt. And I think it is being very prescriptive on the programs that you build, who you and how you align your internal teams, which I think this is kind of where I'm going with, where you can have enablement as a strategic weapon and a competitive driver for the business. And as we look to think about how you're really enabling the entire organization to be aligned, understanding each other's roles in how you impact the customer. Each and every person in a customer impacts a customer. Each and every employee impacts a customer in the organization in some way, shape, and form. And having everyone aligned on that view of what you're doing and how handovers happen internally, to me, is sort of driving towards organizational enablement, and where I believe it becomes a strategic weapon if you're able to leverage enablement, not just in your go-to-market teams of marketing, customer success, sales operations, marketing operations, those kinds of things, but also thinking about how are you better driving the ongoing flow of information back from your prospects and your customers to what you're doing to develop and deliver from an engineering or a product development perspective, to then better position, because you understand the customer challenges even better, to have a better selling motion. So the more that you can pull enablement into that process, you're able organizationally to be a better strategic planner, and I think a better customer focused, and maybe move you towards a customer driven organization. As you think about the lens that I'm putting on this, is because I've been in tech for quite a while, to provide a little bit of background on myself. You're very much focused on product, especially early on in the infancy of what you're doing to build and grow and scale the business. That as you think about moving from that product led and, hey, I know all the answers, to really engaging with your external audiences and doing the due diligence and the research, but also having those good conversations with your prospects and your customers to add to the research, to focus on where your differentiated sweet spot is based on the customer, based on the environment, based on the research. And I truly think that enablement is and should be a strong conduit in helping you drive that engine of really potentially making that pivot and to really aligning teams that don't necessarily always work with each other to understand how the handovers impact the customer.
So when you talk about leveraging enablement to be the glue to bring those organizations together, to work together, to be customer focused, can you think about a time where enablement tipped the scales in a competitive situation?
Now, when we talk about competitive, I might ask you for a little bit more context on what you mean. Are you talking about competitive as a company so that we're better able to compete with our competitors, or
let me rephrase it. I didn't ask it right, but we're when you look at it, you got everybody, reading from the same sheet of music. And as a result, the team engages better. And so maybe the team goes out and wins an opportunity. And who knows if it won the opportunity because of enablement, but it doesn't matter. They just won an opportunity. And you just looked at it and you said, yeah, that just the orchestra here just worked really well together. And every little bit of that was needed to win this specific win this deal. We don't need specific names of customers or anything, but is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I would have to say I'm going to use a general example, and then I'll pivot to a more specific example that is probably representative of a number of times where enablement's been able to be a part to provide the opportunity to provide that unique lens and to provide feedback to potentially align teams more quickly. The general response that I'll give you where I've seen a lot of value is where enablement is helping be the conduit of like a product launch process. So think about all that goes into what happens for a product launch internally, depending on your business, depending on what your product is that you're launching and what level of change this is for the organization. It's super important to enablement to be in the know almost from the infancy. This is what's coming. Okay, you may not know the exact timing, but engineering is working on this, and it's a game changer. And it's a game changer because it changes a little bit of our focus. It puts us in front of the competition. It makes a huge difference with our customer audience because we've heard the feedback that this would make that huge difference. So enablement being a part of that product launch process and where I've been able to have that insight and that knowledge early on to start to mold and shape and think about programmatizing what is going to be coming our way to ensure that those folks who are having the prospect and customer conversations are enabled not after you launch, but when, or actually preferably before you launch. So they're able to have those really strong conversations to actually even tease and drive interest ahead of time. And so that to me is kind of just showing generally where the more you're able to align enablement to really help you with that entire process, the more I think easily it flows and the faster the process can go, assuming that all of everyone else in their role is also able to jump on board and have knowledge ahead of time.
Great example.
I would say, so I would say a specific one would be when you have those opportunities of like all hands on deck. Like we know this is a big customer and we know we're at the precipice of them considering or making a decision. I think I've run into a number of situations there where you're able to use the latest and greatest data. Data is game changer nowadays, and especially with the ability that we have with large language models and AI to be able to really extrapolate real meaning behind some of the data and when you look to aggregate it. And I think, and that's where most specifically for me from an enablement lens, it's, hi, this is literally what's being discussed right now in the call. And these are where you probably are we're going to want to inspect and see where those gaps are. And the data is able to provide that insight and that information. And you're able to then prompt to the manager to then also provide a little bit more of an executive report up of here's how and why we're stuck at stage 2 to stage 3 or much further along in the process. But enablement being a part of forecasting calls to hear what's being discussed, to say, hey, here's where we can offer value. And here's where, because you may not have time to take a look at all the data that's out there. Who does? No one. But who can help you sort through the data? That's where I see enablement playing a role, especially if it's with regards to a tool that you have that's focused on customer engagement with external collateral that you're sharing, or tools like call intelligence. And so those areas of opportunity, I think, are ripe for where I've been able to have some impact and have a potential, be a potential help in moving those deals forward, where you then feel like it's a true all hands on deck. Everyone has put in the effort needed to be able to get this across the finish line, for an example.
Great examples. And there's we could go down any one of these roads.
No, so many.
I just think about, right, like AI and large language models, and how's that helping with enablement? I mean, it's got to be opening a whole bunch of doors and giving more ideas. Enablement as like in terms of evaluating tools that are going to be brought into the organization. I've seen it where enablement's not involved, but then they're asked to enable. And
actually, here's the funny part, Matt. Sometimes we're asked to enable and be the ones walking through the tool. Like, wait, we don't even know the tool.
Right. Well, I've seen the opposite, where enablement is the main buyer in the cycle, and they learn all about it, and then they're trying to jam it down. Well, the perception is that from sales is that the enablement's trying to jam this tool down the throat because they weren't involved in the evaluation process and don't understand the why. So there's a lot of things that, can go awry, but they can be fixed and improved with collaboration. I love the idea
Absolutely.
of enablement as part of forecasting. And again, I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done not so well. I've seen it done well when they're asked to be on the call, but no one says why. And they're never asked to do anything after being on the call. Like, hey, as a result, what do you think? What do you think we should do? What's your feedback? Nothing. They just wasted an hour of their life, wanting to pull their hair out of their head like everybody else on the damn forecast call.
Exactly.
I used to not have gray hair. Then there were forecast calls. So, Pam, what about, like, I guess, for lack of a better word, attribution? In terms of quantifying the impact of enablement in board level terms, what metrics actually get the CEO or the board's attention?
Where you're able to showcase critical leading indicators that you're able to prove out the lagging one. So the revenue generation, how do you, when you're looking at taking the first steps at, where do we want to place effort and energy? Taking a look at, okay, here's where our revenue is, here's the industry, here's the types of customers, here's, what the process looked like. What were some of those? Let's back up now. Let's take a look at what some of those opportunities in time were where the needle jumped significantly, if you know what I'm saying. What were some of those leading indicators? So an example here. So when we think about leading indicators, every business is a little bit different and people measure things differently. A lot of times you have areas where you get stuck in deals, and typically that's first meeting to second meeting. And I don't mean literally one meeting to number 2 meeting, but basically where you're just sort of thinking about this, oh, it's a cool technology, for example. I really like it, but you don't really have any urgency behind that. So how do we then drive a little bit more urgency and drive the why and the differentiators between your solution home? So that tends to be an area. So what are the stage duration times? Stage 1 to stage 2, for an example. So those leading indicators. Now, as we think about it, if that is a known area where we get stuck in the business, if that time period shrinks in general between stage 1 and stage 2, what have we done differently? And how can enablement be a part of the solution to continue to shrink that? For an example, Or if before you start an enablement program, you're taking a look at that, and then you're able to shrink that because you're doing much better training on discovery. You're doing much better in inspection and helping your sales managers do better inspection and coaching for how to potentially drive urgency behind the tool. But for me, it comes to leading indicators, stage duration times, overall deal velocity. What is your entire, what does the timeline for your deal look like? Is it 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, longer, or is it shorter, depending obviously on what you're selling? And how are you able to drive that shrinking over time? So there's another, leading indicator of the business from that standpoint. You can obviously use different markers and indicators from marketing of, leads, marketing qualified to sales qualified. So there's a lot of areas of opportunity, especially in velocity.
Yeah.
If you're looking to drive things forward more quickly. And there's also areas of opportunity when you think about where you're getting stuck in deals. And does that regularly happen? Wow. And you know how you can see that? You can see that right away from your pipeline. Where are we? Typically, you're going to be early on, it's just sitting there. Then you're going to get to that, meeting 1 to meeting 2. Then you're probably going to get to trial. And then it's kind of going to sit there. And so you're like, okay, are those our normal sticking points? And if so, how do we look to impact and shorten those duration times in those stages? And so for me, the more that enablement is able to showcase the ability to provide just-in-time training or just in ongoing alignment of internal teams to understand the handovers that need to happen from stage 1 to stage 2, if that's a challenge, and to be able to be a part of the solution. And so the more that you're able to align with the business, back to the forecasting calls, knowing that this is happening, let's better drive forward programs that will help people be more effective in driving things to a higher velocity rate, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Velocity.
Velocity is a huge one. And then from a true, to dig down into the details of enablement, it's leveraging the enablement tools that you have that are providing you with data. And you can use, we talked about call intelligence, but let's talk about how you're engaging with your external customers with collateral. What's driving interest? Who's looking at what collateral for how long? And who's sharing it throughout the entire buying audience? And I was working with a company one time where, interestingly, marketing was looking at, how do we know we're just about to sign a deal? And so there was a lot of inspection of website traffic at that time. And one of the things that they found out was typically customers in the buying audience, when they were getting close to making a purchase, do you know where they went on the website?
Where?
They went to the executive team. Their backings. So they wanted to see, was there alignment on either, did they know anyone in the executive team? Did they know these investors? Do they feel comfortable about the company? And that was just sort of that final check as you think about making a pretty big and a pretty large purchase in an enterprise.
Do I know anybody I can call to try to get a better deal on this contract?
Right, that too. So, it's super interesting to then use those data points to then also generate the right programs, the right education, and to be able to report it up, like you said, report it up to the executive team of, here's what we're seeing in our enablement tools that are reflective of things either going in the right direction or not going necessarily in the right direction. Because as I've pulled together data in leading enablement teams over the years, I have actually seen both happen as people engage with enablement programs and they're more active in even mentoring programs and in taking part in field advisory boards that enablement is hosting. You're starting to see the numbers go up. Now, is it an immediate? Depends on what your sales cycle is. But I've seen it go up, and I've seen when the engagement goes down, guess what? I've seen the impact of that also happen. And I'm not saying every program I've done has been successful and done things that way, but it was super interesting for me to see, because I was concerned when I was first pulling data, and this is years ago, and just trying to cobble together whatever data I could get at that point in time. But it was super interesting, and I was like, let's cross our fingers here. I don't know if those who are the highest sellers are going to be those who engage most with enablement programs.
In the short
No, you're
term,
not
in the short term,
100%
it's
sure.
not. Yeah.
You're right. But the interesting thing is actually those who do participate in enablement programs a lot of times are either those who are really struggling or those who are so good that they've disciplined themselves so they know when they can align their time and take the time for programs that are going to make a difference for them.
Well,
And so
yeah.
that was kind of an insight moment for
This
me.
is like one of those other roads that I'd love to go down further, but
I know we
shouldn't
have
everybody be
so
participating
many.
in the enablement program? But anyway, we'll leave that. So a question about product-led growth versus sales-led growth. Does enablement change if you have a product-led growth company or a sales-led growth product?
It absolutely changes because I think everything about the company changes. I think a lot of what you're doing when you're in a product-led company is helping them get to a sales-led company, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because again, your revenue is generated from your sales organization, all things being equal. Obviously, you have to have a decent product and all of those things have to go into the mix. But if you have a very product-driven and product-led company, back to your conversation that we had earlier about leveraging SEs really heavily, you're having a product discussion, which means you're having a feature to feature or feature benefit only and not really holistically looking more at the challenge that the customer has to really apply your product. And so for me, as you move to a sales-led organization, you're having much more of those broader discovery questions that don't start with, here's who I am, here's who my customers are, here's what we have as a product set up, here's why you need us, go. You ready?
Yeah. So
okay, so I think enablement, it changes because you're now able to be, you have more of a stage at product development level. When you're a product-led company, you're really trying to help them say, hey, enablement, let us help you here so that we can help you throughout the continuum so that everyone's ready for your product once it goes to market. So a lot of times you're really just trying to get inserted into the process as a product-led company, whereas if you're a sales-driven company, sales is a part of the infancy of what's happening, which enablement then partners really closely with. So I would say it's literally about how the process happens, that enablement, it changes enablement.
And so when does, so maybe here's the question, because if your product-led growth, until you can scale to become a sales-led growth, when is the time for a company to invest in a sales enablement function?
Ooh, this is a really good question because my views of this have changed. They have changed over time. I used to think early and often.
More people need to have that happen in this world.
Right. Early and often, like absolutely. And as you're just getting started, bring enablement in. No, too soon. What enablement really helps with, and what I have experienced in my career has been an example of this with a few short stints in my career of being with really small startups who were not ready for enablement. And so there was a lot of pivoting that I did to provide assistance in whatever way I could, because the company and the business needed help either operationally or they needed help in like literally blocking and tackling of field enablement and telling people exactly how to, use tools and things like that. Not that that's not a part of enablement, but everything was one-off. Yeah. I would say where enablement is able to be effective is if you are at the point in your business motion that you are starting to see some level of predictability and regularity of what that process looks like, that then enablement can help pull the other pieces together to help you have a full programmatic process of what's happening. I'm not just saying process for operational or process sake, but for thinking about when and where training fits in, for thinking about how you're aligning your different stakeholders in the organization to provide what's needed to your frontline folks who are having customer conversations daily to get what they need. And so for me, it's that spot in the evolution of a company where you're starting to get the engine going of repeatability, that enablement can then be a conduit to help you drive that forward.
Well said.
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a black box, but it's kind of like you need to see the indicators of, I'm bringing on board a lot, I'm starting to bring on board more salespeople, which tends to be an indicator of I need someone to train them. So that's where enablement comes in. And I'm starting to see that it's not just new people for right now, but we also have really decent forecastability of where we want the projection of where the business is going to be going. And we have true markers that is, where we're going to go, minus obviously world interruptions and things like that.
Those world interruptions get in the way.
Yeah.
So you're at Menlo Security now.
Yeah.
For the audience, what does Menlo Security do? And then what are you most excited about working with the team there today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in cybersecurity, and very enticed to come to Menlo Security because the opportunity is so ripe for what we do. What do we do? So what we focus on is securing a huge attack vector and where we work and live every day, the browser. Now, more and more than ever before, applications are available through your browser. Everything that you're doing is in your browser. Email, you're clicking on things, you're going through a browser. And so leveraging, protecting that attack vector in and of itself and providing people from an enterprise perspective with only the applications they need to use and moving past sort of the evolving past VDI, if you will, to, provide a less clunky and a less broad and a really heavy type of solution. That's where Menlo Security plays. And what makes me super excited about Menlo is we do it by securing the browser you're in today. You want to use Chrome? Fantastic.
Wow.
We will secure Chrome. We have a way to isolate that you can actually have a very safe engagement with your browser that doesn't take the information to your endpoint. You leverage the Menlo cloud to be able to have basically the word is reflection, but that's not the right word, but a replicated instance of what you're clicking on so that Menlo Security's technology can inspect it that minute that you click. So sometimes the bad actors will plant seeds that on something that's clean, and then they'll add it afterward. So this is literally protecting you. So you're protected for 0 hour. You don't have to wait for that first person to be infected. It's in the Menlo cloud. It never reaches the endpoint, and you don't have to buy a new browser. A lot of our competitors are focused on, we give you an exclusive browser and you use this. And you're like, well, let's see, are my applications going to run best in some unique browser? Probably not, number one. And number two, the other challenge is a lot of them, they're built on the browsers that are out there today, like Chromium, what Chrome is built on. Okay, so if they're going to have the same vulnerabilities as Chrome, do you think you're going to be as fast at fixing them or addressing them as Google will be?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, no, it's a great.
So it's a very exciting time, and this is where, for me, I try to raise your hand from an enablement perspective. Differentiate. That is truly, I think, the key point where we are as a business, which is really moving forward as a differentiated solution, so that customers really can see that you're able to provide that smoother experience for your users, your employees. Whereas if you have to interrupt the business and tell them, pause for a moment, need to go over here.
Slows you down.
It slows you down. So productivity. So if you think about even the costs of that. So that's where I think we have a really unique opportunity. And I'm super excited because we crossed 100 million in our ARR just last fall. So we kind of have that momentum behind us that, always feels good.
Excellent.
When you're in a growth opportunity.
Sounds exciting. You can hear it in your voice. And so very, very cool. Pam, last question. We're the Coach2Scale podcast. We talk about coaching and scaling go-to-market teams, and we bring people on who can have perspectives on that, who have been there and done that. But usually people that are willing to come and talk about this type of stuff, people who care, have had positive role models, have had behavior modeled for them along the way. Who's somebody whose coaching or mentorship helped you in terms of brought you from where you first started to maybe how you approach your business today?
Good question. There's been a lot of people along the way, and super, super good plug here for make sure you have multiple mentors and people that can help you along your journey for different, very focused things. I think the important thing about a mentor is that you really take the opportunity to be very specific about your asks of that mentor and what bring to the table, what you want to learn and grow out of that opportunity. And of course, the mentor always grows as well. And also on the flip side, as you get further and senior in your career, offer to be a mentor for people and let people know that that's the case. But outside of mentorship, I also look towards, sort of that to leaders who maybe I haven't had necessarily a very tight mentor relationship, but who have really blazed a really strong pathway. And one of the leaders that I worked with back in 2014, 2015, also with a cybersecurity company, Proofpoint. And there was a leader there by the name of Tracy Newell. And she has actually just released a book, and it's called Hers for the Taking. I'm not necessarily promoting it, but it is a super good book. And it's, very much focused on the challenge that it is to be a woman and to be in technology, to drive towards the C-suite and to having a voice. And she, just by watching her and reporting to her and hearing her questions and seeing how she's analyzing the business and seeing how she is able to be effective as a C-suite leader was super inspiring for me. And those types of opportunities that I have to learn from others, whether it be a book, whether it be in person, which I had both of, I think is definitely something that has continued to shape me to this day. And don't just always hang your hat on one person. Yeah. Absolutely broaden the ability that you have and the scope to see where you can take things from multiple folks as you look to mold who you are and who you want to be in your career, your personal life, you name it.
Well, I love what you also said. It was subtle, but you said the mentor always grows as well. And that's been a theme that, when I asked that question on the show, that's a theme that's come out over the last year or so is that it's bi-directional.
It's bi-directional.
It really is. Sure. And I can attest to that being on both ends too. So, Pam, this has been great. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about the evolution of sales enablement. We talked about enablement as a strategic business partner and as using it as a competitive advantage. We talked about how that elevates it all the way up to the C-suite. And we talked about the importance of mentorship. So really covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate everything you brought to the conversation today.
You're very welcome. This was great. Great opportunity. I really enjoyed the conversation, Matt. Thank you.
And thanks again, Pam. And for everybody out there watching and listening, thanks for doing that. We appreciate you. Engage with us out there. Let us know you're there on social media. Hit the like button if you liked it, but more importantly, engage. Tell us what you took away. Tell us what questions do you have? What would you like to hear more of? What types of guests would you like to see? We want to bring content and guests to you that make that really hard job that you have a little bit easier. So good luck out there. And until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.